Hello dear students. Today we will discuss political and social structure of nomadic empires. The objectives of the lecture are to understand the political structure of nomadic empires, to analyze the social setup of nomads, to understand the various art forms that flourished under nomadic empires. Now, political structure. In Central Asia's setup, the Xiongnu, Turks and Mongols formed the largest confederation of nomads. In a letter to the Chinese Emperor Wenti, Maodun, the Xiongnu king, once said, "I have united all the Tatar tribes who can bend the bow on horseback into one kingdom. The Turbuktais, Lenore and 26 neighboring kingdoms are under my control after I destroyed the Yuchis. If you don't want Hungnu to cross the Great Wall, don't let the Chinese get close to it. Make sure my messenger gets back safely and isn't held hostage." This statement clearly shows the political power of the head of the tribe. These nomads were at war with China's established empire all the time. There was a conflict between the nomadic Turks and the Sui of China, Mongols and the ruling Song dynasty, and the Xiongnu and the Qin Han of China. When these groups were dispersed, they could not contend with China's mighty empire. However, they were always China's greatest enemies when banded together under a strong leader. Their effective political organization was the reason for this. These powerful setup-based nomadic tribes developed a well-organized political structure. The political system of nomadic groups was made up of three basic levels. At the center was the tribe's ruling family. At the second level were the governors, who oversaw the different tribal groups and led the armies. Local tribal chiefs of various groups were located at the third level of the organization. They served as the community's tribal leaders and carried out their responsibilities under the Khakan's directives. Before Genghis Khan, there wasn't much state power among the nomadic tribes of Central Asia. Genghis Khan added several new elements to the steppes' mobile structure. The clan, comprised of several families of the same blood, served as the foundation for tribal political organization. The Kurultai, an assembly of the leaders of these nomadic clans in Central and West Asia, decided who would be the political group's leader. Kurultai decided the political position of the leader of the tribe. The tribal group adopted Yasa as its code of law. Yasa set the rules for the nomadic empire's legal conduct and assisted in social governance. The chiefs of nomadic tribes were in charge of the tribe's daily affairs and had considerable authority over the other tribe members. After a battle was won, the chiefs of these tribes used to distribute the spoils among the soldiers. They used it to settle disputes and thus acted as judges. Now, nomadic society. Nomads played a significant role in Eurasian society and were essential to it. They set up a unique economy with highly developed methods for raising livestock, grazing herds, traveling as nomads, and making many kinds of crafts and weapons. They also had a unique and well-developed social structure. This was based on the fact that people owned their herds but shared pasture lands. Nomadic society was mobile in two ways. First, the community itself could move around, and second, they could move quickly and far away, both for peaceful and military reasons. These nomads usually lived near the oases, whereas settled farmers used to live in cities. Because of this, the nomads and settled societies of the steppe interacted with each other. In some places, they got married to each other, but in other areas, they were seen to be at war. Having studied their relationship, Barfield concludes that the steppe nomads took an outer frontier stance towards the sedentary Chinese empire. He explains that the outer frontier strategy consists of three major components: the use of violence to terrify the Chinese court, the alternation of war and peace to increase the number of subsidies and trade privileges granted by the Chinese, and the deliberate refusal to occupy Chinese territory that they would then have to defend. As a result, the Emperor of China did three things. First, he took a defensive stance, strengthened the border, and ignored the nomads. Second, respond with force, form an expeditionary cavalry force, and attack the nomads on the steppe. Third, make peace with the nomads by giving them subsidies and border markets as part of expensive peace treaties. Therefore, both shared the bond, even though it was only to satisfy their own needs, but both communities remained busy working out the nature of their relationship. Nomadic people's main goal was to find places for their cattle to graze. Nomadic societies never had to deal with disputes over authority, jurisdiction, and property rights, which were significant parts of the history of civilizations that lived in one place. In the nomadic society, however, there were no restrictions on the ruler's exercise of absolute tyranny. In real life, tyranny could only be stopped by tradition, the strength of the clan, a sense of social hierarchy, and the fear of revolt. The social structure of steppe society was based on the cultures of different tribes, which were always moving. The nomadic culture depended on the migration cycle. There were differences between the tribal groups based on how strong the animal and human groups were. All the household necessities of these nomads were made of wood and leather. Both genders shared equal tasks in society. Men had to take care of the cattle and make tools like bows, arrows, and other tools. They hunted, shot arrows, and went on military campaigns for the rest of the time. All the other work, like housework, milking and preparing other products from animals, and raising the children, was done by the women. When the men weren't there, the women were responsible for everything. In Scythian society, men and women were valued the same. There were strong women leaders in the Scythian community who were involved in politics. For example, in 530 BC, Cyrus led a group of Persians into the land of the Massagetae Scythians. In this war, Cyrus beat Scythia and killed Supergapeses, who was in charge of the Scythian army. The Scythian queen, Tomyris, then took control of the military and killed the Persians who killed her son, Supergapeses. In one of the most famous and horrible stories from ancient times, Tomyris told the Persian king Cyrus the Great to have his head cut off and his blood put into a wine bottle. Tomyris' bravery and determination are still admired today. The Scythians used to bury their dead with their belongings. The Scythian way of life can be seen in the graves at Kurgana. The objects found in the Kurgana graves show how vital the dead person was in society. In Asiac Mound, a Scythian king was buried with his long sword. a short dagger, clay jars, wooden trays with meat, and precious bowls made of gold and silver, which shows that he was very wealthy. In other Scythian graves, the dead people were buried with less valued grave goods. This indicates that Scythian society had different levels of social status. The law in Hun society was based on their customs. Drawing a sword was punishable by death, and theft was punished by taking the thief's property as well as the property of his family. Cuts on the face were punishments for minor crimes. The Hun society can be called proto-feudal. In a feudal society, fiefs of land were passed down to the feudal lord of the empire, but in the Hun society, people were passed down. As the Huns conquered more and more territory, members of the royal houses of conquered states were also given to the Hun Empire's rulers. Frequent slave trading took place between Roman slave traders and foreign captives. Hun family slaves were usually treated well, and they could either buy their freedom or earn it by fighting on their master's side in battle. The Huns' daily lives revolved around hunting and archery. They pushed their kids to learn how to hunt from a young age. The Hun women were not only great at riding horses, but also at using bows and arrows to shoot at targets. They helped their husbands protect children and the elderly from enemy attacks. On the wall of the Talas fortress in 36 BCE, they fought bravely alongside their men and against the Romans and Chinese troops. They were the last to leave their posts. The necessities of life clearly demonstrated how women participated in defense and how children were taught how to use a bow and arrow. This made it easier for the small group of nomad Huns to defend their independence. The Huns worshipped the sun, the moon, and other celestial bodies. They also sacrificed to the heavens, the earth, spirits, and their ancestors. In Turkish society, people were treated differently based on their social and economic status and social hierarchies. The steppe nomads were now divided by how much wealth they had. The Turkish inscriptions show that rich people are better than poor people. The inscriptions describe poor men as pitiful, useless, and low. Livestock, especially herds of horses, was the Turks' primary source of wealth and most wanted booty. The burial mounds of ordinary soldiers were not as crucial as the graves of high-ranking aristocrats. Neither expensive weapons nor horses were found in the graves of the poorest peasants. Nomads who were poor and had lost their animals were put in winter quarters and small permanent settlements called beyliks, where they practiced small-scale farming. They mostly cultivated millet and constructed forts to store their grain. The fights between the rich and the poor, and even between beggars and the common people, were not valued at all by their society. Their community as a whole was very different from the slaves. Ulus was the name for the tribal society of the Mongols. In this society, the status of people was based on how many animals they owned. Noyan were the leaders of the tribes that made up the nomadic society as a whole. They helped the king or emperor of the Nomadic Empire in certain decision-making policies. Their main job was to control the movement of the clan and military leaders during raids and wars. They were also in charge of planning the tribe's military movements. The Arat were another group of herders who were part of a tribal group. They had smaller herds and got pasture from the leader of the group. They didn't always help the Khan. Khan means king of nomads, and Noyan. The Bogal, who was also in the lower ranks, might have been part of the Noyan and Arat. They worked for the leaders of the group. Children and teens did most of the herding. In the yurts, women used to work with milk, wool and meat. Camels in Gobi Desert didn't need much care, but horses did. They needed a place to graze. Now, nomadic art and architecture. The nomadic groups varied in terms of ethnicity and language, but the way of life on the steppes was remarkably consistent across all cultures and geographical areas. The steppe inhabitants of Central Asia can be divided into three major linguistic groups based on linguistic differences: Indo-Europeans, Turks, and Mongols. The sedentary people of Central Asia referred to nomads as barbarians because they frequently attacked them. This artistic culture of nomads flourished due to the influence of settled civilizations. These wandering, nomadic people left behind artworks made of bronze, silver, and gold. Their elaborate clothing, ornamented equipment, belt plaques, harness plates, sword belt buckles, wagon panels, handles, and carpets were the main subject of their artwork. The Scythians were the first tribes whose culture was nomadic. They greatly influenced nomadic art. Axes, spears, and swords were used in the conflict. The invention of bows and arrows is credited to Scythians. Bone stone or bronze was used to make Scythian bows. They also produced animal artwork. All nomadic tribes have produced a plethora of animal art. The Assyrian natural art had been influenced by Scythian art. As a result, Assyrian naturalism was used to describe the animal art of the Scythians. The walls of the royal palaces were decorated with beautiful Assyrian art before the Scythians used gold to create ornamental animal sculptures. As a result, unlike Assyrian art, Scythian art was a culture of nomadic tribes. Although the themes of their artistic creations were animals or birds, they were decorated in a much more exquisite manner. Scythian ornaments and jewelry were made of gold. Most of the Central Asia's nomadic arts continued to focus on birds and other animals. The earliest known work by the Scythians is the iron and gold axe of Calirimus in Kuban, which dates to around the 6th century and depicts the traditional Assyro-Babylonian and Luristanian motif of two ibexes standing next to the tree of life. The excavations at Khalchian and Iconium have established the beginning of Kushan art in Bactria. Very little research has been done to determine its origin in Gandhara proper. This is because the Kushan art of Gandhara has only been studied from a limited perspective. Only some significant cities in the cultural periphery of Gandhara, Pushkalavati and Taxila, and two sites outside the Indus region, that is Mathura and Surkotal, have yielded Kushan artifacts. In addition to these, several gold and copper coins as well as at least 20 Kharosti inscriptions have been discovered. Although numerous Buddhist sculptures from the Kushan period are known to exist in the area, Gandhara art has never been studied from the scholarly point of view in order to understand the civilization properly that produced these sculptures. Instead, it has only ever been appreciated for the wealth of its sculptures and Buddhist religion. The majority of the Kushan sculptures from the Gandhara are Buddhist. Although the Buddha himself never went to Gandhara, the region over time turned into a sort of holy land for his devotees. Stupas and monasteries were erected over a number of locations that were thought to be connected to the Buddha even before his birth. The Buddha was never portrayed in human form in the early Buddhism that Ashoka brought to this region. However, constant contact with the pantheistic religion and artistic culture of the Western world caused a rift between the purist and the more progressive Gandhara Buddhists. Kanishka is said to have called the fourth Buddhist council at Kuwana near Jalandhar or at Kandalwana in Kashmir, putting an end to the disagreements that had distracted the Buddhist church for almost a century, whether out of conviction or as an act of liberal patronage. Mahayanism, a liberal and progressive school of Buddhism, consequently flourished in Gandhara and emphasized on, among other things, the deification of future Buddhas as possessing providences and the transformation of the Buddha into a great mythological, almost eternal God. The Buddha was finally allowed to be portrayed as a human being in art. It is matter of debate whether the first Buddha image was created in Mathura or Gandhara and when. It most likely developed simultaneously in both locations, with the other, that is Gandhara, borrowing its type from the Western world, while the first, that is Mathura, grew indirectly out of indigenous Indian art. The earliest Buddha images were once thought to date from the reign of Kanishka, but Marshall claimed long ago that an early Gandhara style emerged during the 1st century CE. Numerous academics have pushed the date back even to the 1st century BCE due to new excavations by the Italian archaeological mission in Swat and a re-evaluation of the Taxila evidence. Turks were renowned for building numerous monuments among the nomadic steppe tribes. The statue of the stone man was one of their most well-known monuments. The stone man monument honors a Turkic warrior who once stood in a long robe, one hand holding a cup of fire, the other handle of a knife. This indicates that the Scythian and Hun art that flourished from the art of the natural world changed during the time of the Turks. These nomads now value their warrior soldiers more than the animal and the natural world. Burying places for Turkic leaders can also be found in some areas of Mongolia, in addition to the stone man art. There were statues of the dead and Turkic inscriptions about the people buried in these graveyards. Large complexes of buildings were constructed and numerous sculptures erected at these burial sites. The Mongols adopted and valued sedentary people, artistic traditions like other nomadic peoples. Even though nomadic empires ruled sedentary societies for many centuries, the nomads never changed or evolved to match the practices of the sedentary groups. The arts of the settled people were patronized and adopted by all of the Mongol kings. Mongolians have a tendency to decorate everything in their homes, gears and animal trappings. Ugudai, the son of Genghis Khan, built and embellished the Mongol capital city of Karakoram. The Mongols adored music. They developed khumi or throat singing, a distinctive style of singing. With this, we come to the end of today's lecture. Thank you.